All right, so hi everyone. This is my presentation. I chose the photo book New York Club Kids by Walt Cassidy. So the book was created by Walt Cassidy, or also known as sort of alter ego, or more like his persona, Walt Paper. Walt Cassidy is an interdisciplinary artist and a writer. He studied a lot at the School of Visual Arts. That's where, when he moved to New York City, he focused a lot in his art, like drawing, painting, sculpting, jewelry, photography, kind of all types of art forms. He's now living in Brooklyn, New York. Um, his work is very focused on the creative identity, gender, sexuality, sort of firsthand experience. A lot of this goes into the late 80s, early 90s when he was a big part of the starting of the club kid scene. Him and a group of other people sort of started this, in a way, a movement of changing what New York City nightlife was and the expression of identity. Um, Eventually, as he got older, going into 1996, he did become an exhibition director for 303 Gallery. He didn't only stop there, he went on to curate in other exhibitions in London, working with other artists and photographers. Um, Even in 2014, he was seen doing other types of like jewelry design and painted murals. And then eventually, leading up to 2019, is when he published this book. So before we continue going into more about the book, who were the club kids? Essentially, the club kids were in a way our first influencers. Back in the late 80s, up to 1996, they were a popular group who were very fashion forward and artistic, mainly composed of younger people, sort of the teens or like the early 20 ages of like kids going out in the New York City nightlife. And it wasn't only just kids, it was also like adults and everybody kind of all together. But in a way, this was a movement. They were people who wanted to express gender equalities, open sexuality, and they really pushed it onto mainstream media. Um, their goal was to show everybody sort of this other side of the nightlife, and also in a way drew light to really dark times when during this time it was really heavy on the HIV epidemic, and when things like that were happening in the media, they sort of brought light, and they wanted to sort of bring hope and how you can still be artsy and creative, and how like this is like what this is like the new era. This is what's happening now. Um, it also led to also people who are still famous today, such as Amanda Lepore, even Wallpaper himself or Walt Cassidy. He is now still doing things. Unfortunately, though, around the 19 around 1996 is when people kind of say this was the end of the Club Kid era. There was a guy, Michael Alig. He was sort of, in a way, the person who helped start it. He had a friend, or also a roommate, by the name of Robert Riggs that people called Freeze. Unfortunately, in 1996, they ended up murdering drug dealer Andre Melendez, who was also another big part of the club kid scene. The club kid scene, unfortunately, did sort of fall off into heavy drug use and a lot of shady things happening. And after this murder, a lot of the club kids who were not necessarily associated with this drew away from it in sort of fear that they'd be involved, and sort of marking this kind of end to this original club kid era. So now a little bit about the book. Walt Cassidy sort of said that this book was a visual archive. It was his diary, his experience, his inside look into who the club kids were and what this era was. Um, it was published in 2019, and the foreword was by Mark Holgate, who is a fashion editor for Vogue. He was an editor, and he wrote a lot of papers working with other artists. The book itself was a 9 by 11 hardcover, about 376 pages. Um, the book does retail, if you go on Amazon or on his website, between $2,000 to $5,000. It has now become sort of a collector's piece in a way, and it's really hard to get your hands on this book at this time. But this book sort of brought people into this era, people who romanticize it, people who lived it, people who wish to experience it again. This was a very big moment during this sort of decade, not decade, but those kind of 10 years of what it was, how it impacted fashion, how it still impacts fashion today, how people now sort of refer back to this era and they sort of reminisce about the fashion and what it was like to be a club kid, pushing, what the concept of gender and what sexuality was, even on like national television, in the press, people were writing papers. The club kids were everywhere, and even now we see a lot of a lot of connections between like media today and artists today and how they are sort of in a way like going back to this era and like feeding off this like aesthetic and even now contemporary culture. Um, and then finally we have an interview by Metal in Metal Magazine by Laura Delmage. It was sort of a sit down interview with Walt himself. She asked him plenty of questions, such as his idea of what he means by destroyed and reimagined ideas. He goes on to say how nostalgia can be a slippery slope, how people sort of fall back on the idea of nostalgia and they can't escape it. He even states, I see my life and work as an orchard that seasonally moves through various cycles of life. Ideas are planted, cultivated, harvested, and then decomposed. Sort of this idea of things are never forever and they will go away. Um, she then also goes on to ask why he made this book. And he goes and says, like, this, he wanted people to understand that the 90s, you know, stated how this was like the last analog decade and the impact it had on, the contemporary culture. And he wanted to sort of bring that out and show people that like here is like the raw and sort of like what it was back then and why we have what we have now. She also goes on to ask him more personal questions, asking him about his chosen family and where would he be without them, talking about queer kid identity and how having a chosen family was extremely important and protecting the womb of the club kids and allowing the clubs to be a safe space to explore, your own creativity and your own personal identity with a group of people who also felt the same. Then I have an annotated works cited, and then my full works cited. Thank you.